scale, the numbers are colossal. We have, at the moment, seen a remarkable expansion in Indian higher education. We've gone from, when the British left, since Rob Line is here, I must make his life difficult. The British left us with 16% literacy in 1947. And it was particularly bad for women because they left us with 8.9% female literacy. 1 out of every 11 Indian women could read and write. We had 400,000, 4 lakh students in higher education in the entire country. 26 universities and about 670 colleges. So we've taken that, from that level, in the course of these 66 years, we've taken the 16% to 74%. We've taken the 26 universities to 650 universities, the 700 or less than 700 colleges to 35,000 colleges, and the 4 lakh students, 400,000 students, to about 20 million students in higher education today. So the expansion has been colossal. And one thing we're reasonably proud of is that we've actually managed to reach out to a lot of unreached, include people who've traditionally been excluded from education, either by virtue of gender, caste, region, language, the urban-rural divide, all of which are genuine factors and remain to some degree factors of our society, but much less so now. Where we haven't done so well, arguably, is in the third year. I spoke about expansion and equity. But the third year of excellence is where we faltered a bit. Excellence was something we consciously began to strive for really in the 50s. The creation of the IITs and the IIMs and so on was very much a Nehruvian vision of trying to establish in the government sector universities that would really aspire to the top. In fact, there's something particularly poignant about IIT Kharagpur being set up on the site of a British detention centre. Italy detention camp, so that what was a symbol of political oppression became instead a symbol of hope for the new technological future. But besides them and a handful of elite institutions such as the one that Vikram and I attended, and perhaps the one that Raj Kumar here is setting up or is running now, by and large these are islands of excellence in a sea of mediocrity. And the proof of that lies in the problem of the fourth E, which I've added to our conventional catechism, and that is the E of employability. We basically do not have, for the most part, graduates who meet the requirements of our employers. FICCI even did a study. 64% of employers said they were not happy with the quality of our graduates that they were getting to hire. The supplies in engineering, IITs, not IITs, one notch below that. It applies in technical institutions of various sorts. And as you know, in the IT sector, a company like Infosys essentially has created a university campus in Mysore. It hires people that it's not happy with and then educates them for a year. And this is not on-the-job training, which any big company will do. It's actually education. What they're doing is they're sitting around making up the deficiencies of what these kids have failed to learn in college. So that's the challenge, if you like, the challenge of quality, and not only quality, but relevant quality that our employers are looking for. So what are we doing about it? There's a whole series of interventions, all of which we're trying simultaneously, and therefore some things are working better than others and faster than others. Some things will take more time. The expansion of capacity is an obvious one. We've suddenly rolled out more IITs, more. We should have done this gradually over years. Instead, there was a sudden spurt a few years ago, and that is a challenge in itself, but a spurt of new IITs, new IIMs, new NITs, building on the old RECs, the regional engineering colleges. We have also, as you all know, decided to permit foreign universities to set up here. It's a slightly complicated business. There was a bill introduced in Parliament which ran into flak from the Standing Committee. So we decided to bypass the need for a new law by amending existing regulations to permit foreign universities to have campuses here, which is not quite the same thing as the law, as the new bill, as the old bill, which is now never going to pass in this lifetime of this Parliament. But that bill envisaged something a little more complicated. This is fairly simple. Any foreign university can set up a campus of itself, of its own university here in India, by opening a company under Section 25 of the Companies Act of 1956, which is the section that governs non-profit companies. And they can then do everything. They can, like in any other Indian company, they can buy land or lease land, build buildings, hire people, do whatever they like. The main difference between this and what the other bill would have permitted is they can only offer the degrees they already offer in their home countries, and those degrees therefore will have to go through the process of being recognized in India, except that we have got the Association of Indian Universities to commit in advance that they will automatically recognize these degrees. So that's one condition, and the other condition which is there because of the Standing Committee's earlier objections to the previous bill is a condition whereby the universities wishing to set up in India would have to be ranked in the top 400 of one of the widely recognized university rankings, either THE, the Times Higher Education ranking, or the Quacquarelli-Simons ranking, the QS, or the Shanghai Jiantong ranking. If you're in the top 400 of those, you can open the campus in India, no questions asked. So that's one way of expanding capacity. It's not just expanding capacity, by the way. We spend $1 billion, some figures go as high as 7, with billion, the most conservative estimate. Every year, Indian parents are spending $1 billion in sending their kids abroad. You know, the good authorities of Doha and Kuwait and Singapore open campuses of foreign universities there, expecting to be able to give a good international education to Arabs who can't get visas easily for America and so on. And instead, these campuses are being filled up by Indians. It's a very typical problem. And so here we are, offering them this alternative of coming in here. The other thing we're doing in capacity, as Vikram's already mentioned, is liberalizing conditions for private universities. Here's one example of that. And of course, as I said, creating additional universities where we can. We've also decided to focus a little bit, as a government we must, on educationally backward districts by creating model degree colleges in all the 374 districts out of our 629 that are classified as educationally backward. So capacity we're trying to increase. We're also trying to pump in more money into the state system, because what people often don't realize, especially people sitting here who graduated from places like Delhi University, is that the bulk of India's students are actually going to places like Bundelkhand University, or you know, I don't want to take too many bad examples, but examples of places which are deeply, savagely under-resourced, because the state governments simply don't have money in their education budget to finance them. And they're getting an apology for an education in these places. And they're coming out ostensibly with graduation certificates that aren't worth the paper they're written on. So we are now, just this year, we've created something called the Rashtriya Uchchata Shikshan Abhiyan, which is to pump central money into the state systems on the basis of clearly drawn up plans. We've required every state to set up a higher education council. Only 12 of them have so far. The rest will not get any money until they do. And these state higher education councils, professional autonomous bodies, will vet a number of proposals and recommend them to the centre for financing. We've also done I've taken too long given Vikram wanted me to speak in 10 minutes, but we've done various things on things like narrowing the gender gap, a lot of incentives for girls' education. I can talk about them in more detail if people have questions. And we've tried to address the overall challenge of quality by asking ourselves very honestly whether we can do everything, and concluding we can't. So, for example, there's much more emphasis now, which has never been really in the history of Indian education, on academia-industry interaction. We're now openly saying to the private sector, come into our university spaces. We're saying that if you want to do research, I mean, it's very interesting. In India, 80% of all R&D expenditure is in the government sector. 80%. If you look at the OECD countries, 75% of all R&D expenditure is from the private sector. Now, we can't perhaps be like the West, but why can't the private sector do much more in terms of spending money on R&D? Why do all our research institutions have to depend on government handouts? Can't the private sector go out there and say, look, if you want to research this and this, and you have students who are capable, here's what we will finance you, this is what we'll do with the proceeds or the benefits or profits or whatever. I mean, we're encouraging this. It's not uncommon in the Western world. It's extremely rare, if it exists at all, in our country. We now have created a rule where you can no longer open a polytechnic in India unless you have a tie-up with an industry. So we don't want people teaching in polytechnics on the basis of what they learned in their textbooks 30 years ago. We want them directly connected to an industry that tells them what current industry practice is. So these kids are actually learning things they can apply in the real world. We are really trying to connect this much more. We've also decided this year to open up community colleges. So we've created essentially a plan for 200, 120 will be established this year. The community college, which is a concept shamelessly borrowed from the West, is a concept of a sort of halfway house between a pure vocational training center and a regular university. It's a 2-year college. You go in, you get a mix of some academic courses and lots of vocational courses. If you simply messed up in high school and you really are gifted academically and you do very well in the academic courses, you can still leave after those 2 years and go to a regular university. But if, as we expect, most of you who come into a community college will be people who couldn't hack it academically in high school, you can concentrate on the vocational courses, leave with a 2-year certificate, and be certified to perform a useful function in our society. Right now, with 1.2 billion people, we have a nationwide shortage of masons, of plumbers, of auto mechanics, of certified electricians. It's silly. And because we, of course, have a 3,000-year-old culture, under which if you wanted to be a cobbler or a carpenter, you better have a dad or an uncle who is a cobbler or a carpenter, because nobody else is going to teach you. We have constantly been transmitting knowledge through the gene pool, which is why the caste system evolved, which is why the sons of politicians are politicians, right? I mean, and the sons of Bollywood stars are Bollywood stars. So to break free of that, we must create a much greater culture of vocational education. And again, I challenge the private sector to step up to the plate and set up more of these institutions. It'll serve them and it'll help create the kind of society in which they can flourish. So these are just some examples. I'm very conscious I've gone over the time allotted, so let me stop here. I'd be very happy to respond in greater detail to questions and comments. But the bottom line with all of this is, and I'm saying this with profound sort of concern, if we get this right, if we can actually educate all these young people poised to come into our society, we actually can become the workhorse of the world. The ILO has estimated that by 2020, we'll have 116 million people in the work starting age of 20 to 24. China will only have 94 million. Okay, so we are actually going to be where they were a generation ago, if these 116 million people are either educated or trained vocationally to take advantage of the opportunities that the 21st century has to offer them. At a time when the rest of the world is aging, by the way, average age in Japan in 2020, 47. In China, somewhere over 40, Europe, 46. Even the US is going to be 40 in 2020. Our average age will be 29. So we really have this tremendous opportunity to be the dynamic, youthful, productive workforce for the world, the work engine for the world. But if we get it wrong, if we can't educate and train them, or we screw it up with bureaucratic red tape or ideological agendas, I think the alternative stares us starkly in the face in 165 districts of our 629. The 165 that have been afflicted to a greater or lesser degree by Maoist insurgency. That's unemployed, unemployable, undereducated, frustrated young men who have absolutely no stake in the society we're trying to build. If we don't want more of that, we've got to get this part right. So for me, education is not just a social and economic issue, it is a national security challenge for this country. I'll leave it there.
Get back to your focus on education. Just to provide some perspective on rankings, there's a Times Higher Education ranking of Britain. 13th. IIT Kharagpur is 30th, and there's a string of IITs there. Then there's Jadavpur, Aligarh Muslim, and Jawaharlal Nehru making up the list at number 57. Delhi University doesn't figure in this list. Perhaps it wasn't rated. I don't know. But so that may be distortion. The other point you made is essentially about capacity itself being somewhat flexible, which is that you can't look at the university as the necessarily dominant or exclusive channel for providing skills, for providing education that is then adding to livelihood or employability. Whether it's community colleges or vocational training is a critical part of this this framework, which is not something we're really talking about here. This is not a panel that addresses that issue, but we can get into it in discussion. Let me turn to you, Alice. And
before you do, can I just briefly clarify on the rankings? We actually called in the Times Higher Education people and asked them to explain what goes into their rankings. And it turns out that one of the reasons India has simply not been doing well, and I'm not, let me clarify, we were very defensive in the past saying these rankings are irrelevant to India and so on, the ministry's line, and I refused to accept that line and said we have to at least look at what these rankings tell us about what we're doing right and wrong. But anyway, we now say the opposite. We sort of beat our breasts. Even the President of India makes speeches saying that it's such a shame we have nobody in the top 200 and so on. Take the Times Higher Education. 30% of the weightage comes from research. A further 30% comes from citations, which obviously are published research. So 60% of the weighting in these rankings is research. Now, traditionally in India, for centuries, our universities have been teaching institutions where very little research is done. And our research is done in small and specialized centers where very little teaching is done. So we basically aren't players in a field in which 60% of the odds are stacked against us. There's another 7.5% for internationalism, that is international faculty, international students, which of course in the Indian context is extremely unusual. So I'm not, as I say, I don't wish to be defensive. I think we ought to be doing much more research. And I pointed out that we are emphasizing that. But this is one of the basic numerical reasons why we just don't figure in these rankings.
Well, that perhaps gives the Punjab University achievement all that much more credit. I mean, what is it doing right that its peers are not? Alice, your perspectives in Global University yesterday, a memorandum of understanding. So there are various ways in which you are trying to engage with Indian institutions. Clearly, that is perhaps going to enhance capacity here, or even take students away there. So what is the strategy behind these efforts? There's a green light that we should see.
The green light didn't come on. Well, first of all, I feel rather humble in this company, talking about one college of one university in one country, which is relatively very tiny compared with what you have to deal with and all the issues and problems that you're confronting, which are quite extraordinary and are very global in their nature. I also feel very humble to be speaking at a meeting of the Brookings Institution, which I never, ever thought to do. And I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted to have been invited by Vikram to do this. So thank you very, very much for having me here. What can I contribute to this discussion? Well, Somerville College, Oxford, is, first of all, we are part of a university that goes back for nearly 900 years. And I have just signed a memorandum of understanding with the university that goes back for 4 years. And absolutely thrilled to be doing that. The University of Oxford needs to change, move with the times, go on contributing to the world economy and ecology of learning in important ways, as it has been doing over the centuries. And I think it's now at a point where it's doing a lot of that in a very, very vital and vibrant way. One of the reasons why the University of Oxford continues to hold its own in those accursed rankings is that we have a system of colleges, of which mine is one, in which people study different disciplines and interdisciplinarity flourishes. And that means that our academics meet with other colleagues every day in their working lives over lunch as tutors of their students to discuss matters that don't belong in boxes. So we cross all the different interdisciplinary barriers, and this leads to great innovative thinking for which Oxford is still renowned. Not for nothing is our medical school, for example, still ranked #1 in the world, or the whole university about #5. And the interdisciplinarity of the colleges is one of the sources of that intellectual vibrance, and it does feed into research as well as into teaching. So Oxford is a great research university, and I think that means that we have a lot to offer in the international educational scene. Somerville College, to descend to the micro level in this company, was founded in 1879 as one of the first 2 women's colleges. It's now a mixed college and has been for 20 years. But it was founded as a women's college to include the excluded, to reach out to those unreached, as you have said. It continued in that tradition very proudly and continues to do so. One of the very first models of that outreach was an undergraduate named Cornelia Sarabji, who came to Oxford. She came to Somerville College on a scholarship. The money had been raised by members of the British establishment, including the principal of Somerville College, to bring her over to Britain. And she came thinking she was going to read modern languages, but really wanted to read law. And she became the first woman of any nationality to study law at Oxford. She became the first woman to practice as a lawyer in India. And she used her skills as a lawyer and her insights, and she used her gender to reach people who had previously never been reached by the law and had no legal support for their rights. Women in Purdah, the lowest castes of women who couldn't speak for themselves, had no access to any kind of advocacy. And that is part of the tradition of my college, of which we're very proud, which has led us to develop what we're trying to do now, which is an interdisciplinary centre for sustainability based on our links with India. Those links continued, of course, through the 130 plus years since Somerville was founded, and we've had a few other Indian firsts. First Indian woman ambassador, first Indian woman prime minister. We also had the first British woman prime minister, but that's another story. We now are building on that inheritance to build within Oxford and for Oxford, and not just for the college, a centre for sustainable development. And we hope a physical centre as well as a programme which brings Indian postgraduate students from Indian universities to Oxford to benefit from the education that a great research university can give them, to do higher degrees, and including DPhils, or what we call DPhils, what most of the world call PhDs, and to return to India with those research skills and that research knowledge to fertilize the educational environment here at that level. Now, those students may or may not go into policy development. I'm going to embarrass you, Shriman, by asking you to stand up for a moment. Exhibit A, Shriman Sai Raman, is one of our three first Indira Gandhi scholars at Somerville College, funded by the Government of India, which, very, very warm thanks. The University of Oxford has matched that funding so that in time we will have 5 of those scholarships, and we're trying to build that program very actively, as well as provide a building for them in the future to live in and work in and study in with all the other academics from the university working in many different disciplines. So Shriman is interested in water. Our other scholars are interested in governance with a science basis and in biodiversity and conservation. Those are the courses that they have chosen to do, and from which we selected our first 3 scholars for the India Centre. The idea is that in our own necessarily very small way, we can make a contribution to opening doors, to changing the climate in which higher education works, and to cross not just the boundaries of disciplines and the boxes in which learning and research happen, but also the national boundaries. One of our most international colleges at Oxford, Somerville, is very proud to call itself that. One of the colleges, perhaps the college with the strongest links to India, and certainly in terms of Indian women, the deepest and strongest links, has a lot to contribute, I think, to the discourse that you have laid out in macro terms, Shashi. I've got lots and lots of notes and statistics here, but I think that's the main message that I wanted to convey, that we are trying to contribute, as other universities do, to making a difference in largest and greatest democracy in the world. Difficult day on which to say that, perhaps, but that I do believe it to be democracy rampant. And to do so through the science of sustainability, which is not a single subject or a single science, but many different ones. And we do have, of course, a physical presence already in India. Oxford University Press has been here for over 100 years. We have strong research links. One example is Indox, which is a network of 12 leading cancer centres representing a partnership between the University of Oxford and leading medical academics in India. And we are building student programs like the law faculty's moot court program, and Oxford students carry out internships. We're involved through ICES Innovation and with universities in Kolkata and Gujarat. We have offered assistance to the Government of India by bringing several groups of Indian members of Parliament over to Britain, and the Chevening Scholarship Scheme, of course, contributes a lot to that. There is a significant growth in the number of Indian students, but when I tell you that that means growing to the current number of 336, I think you will see that we have a gap. And it's my ambition, on behalf of the University of Oxford and Somerville College, that we should actually grow to a very much larger number of Indian scholars.
Are we just 336 Indians?
Yes. That's not enough, is it?
It's also much lower than I expected.
Well, of course, we've got wonderful records in the past, something like 160 Rhodes Scholars. Yes, it is. It's, to my mind, astonishingly small, and I think we must do better. There is, of course, a vast Indian diaspora in Britain, and partly because of nationality laws, those people don't share in Indian nationality. They do share in a pride in being Indian, and they travel to and from India a great deal. So those 336 stand for a much larger number of people with an Indian identity. But basically, we are not doing what I think we ought to be in a good, vibrant academic relationship. And our new, more than double that number, Vikram.
What was the highest number of Indians in the past? Surely,
I don't know.
independence, there must have been larger. Well, there was an Indian Majlis in Oxford 100 years ago. It must have had
Yes.
members.
Well, we had our share of Maharajas.
I would have thought they had 400, 500 Indians in Oxford every year in the 10s and 20s.
Yes.
No, but she's
So,
336 for the whole of the university.
I know, it's an amazing statistic, and I think not one that we should be proud of. And so in our small way at Somerville College, with our India Centre that we want to build and our India programme of sustainability, we're making a contribution.
When Indians still paid the same fees as the Brits did, surely there were more than 300.
Well, yes.
No. 1979, Margaret Thatcher came.
Well, I'm sorry. I have to apologise for our alumni.
More than the Brits did? Oh, well, the discrimination got worse after 79.
Well, Vikram, perhaps we saw you coming. But I have to say that without going on and taking up unnecessary time on that's much better spent on discussion of principles, with giving you facts and figures, which I could do for a lot longer from my notes, I think I would like to simply say we want to do at Oxford, and I speak for the university as a whole, which is very much involved in our college's project, and at Somerville College, which has this fine tradition. We want to do better. We want to do it through partnerships. We want links with academic institutions throughout India. We have some of those links already, but we need to build far more. We want to bring particularly Indian postgraduate students, but undergraduates as well, to Oxford in numbers to create a real critical mass of people with the training which we know we can give of the highest possible quality, come back to this country to enrich education and business in this country. And I need ideas which I can take back and share with my colleagues, the Vice Chancellor and others at the university. And I also need offers of partnership. And we have at least a couple of those in this room already. And I have signed an MOU with Jindal University. Was absolutely delighted on visiting the British High Commission today when we talked about partnerships, and they said, well, of course, Jindal is one of the best. And I thought, yes. So I would very much welcome ideas about how we can do better at Oxford on the basis of the little that I've told you now.
So here's the question: if foreign universities were allowed to set up campuses as per the terms of the bill, which is not a reality now, but that was the would Oxford consider setting up a campus here? I'm sure there are lots of English universities or British universities that would consider it. Would somebody this sort of traditional the first generation of British universities, Oxford, Cambridge, would that be a realistic option? Because you made a very fundamental point about the need for aggregation. The value of a university comes from people, interacting in proximity. And we're looking at somewhat divergent trends there, because, if you bring technology into the picture, when we're talking about the kind of numbers that we are, 20 million, 10 million, any number, any million, it doesn't matter what's in front of it. We have to be thinking of remote delivery, of virtual universities, or structures that cannot or avoid the problem of aggregating physically large numbers of people. So are we, in a sense, losing something as a result of those models? Maybe you don't have to answer this now. I'm just sort of raising questions as we go along. But Raj, perhaps you've been through the experience of setting up a private university. You've tested all the regulations and the promises that the government has made to private universities. One, what has the experience been like? How have you managed to deal with these constraints? But two, I think the more important issue here is why is there this segmentation? Why has it emerged? Why did the regulatory framework not anticipate this and deal with it in terms of some sort of quality standards? And what harm is it doing, if any, to the concept of private universities? Sorry,
I'll give a brief answer on the question of whether Oxford would consider setting up a campus. I mean, I think that question is always under consideration, and there's never a final answer, no. But at the moment, the university's policy is rather to forge as many diverse partnerships as possible and to really knit itself into the fabric of the international academic community and provide the research opportunities in particular. We want Indian undergraduates. We have now changed the rules that ought to have been changed some time ago about not accepting CBSEs as a qualification for undergraduates. But even more so, we want to share in the research talent that is bubbling up in such abundance in India, and help with training and providing our research facilities and the extraordinary background that Oxford has as a research university. That cannot easily be done, at least not at the moment, without the proximity of the individuals to each other and the experience of actually being part of the university, at least for a certain length of time, and then having those continuing personal contacts, as I think the community of Rhodes Scholars would probably attest. So I'll leave my answer at that and hand over to Raj.